Hello, my name is Gianni Mendez, and for my cultural presentation, I will be doing it on the poetry and plays of Federico Garcia Lorca. So, before we delve any further, I want to go into a bit of more background information. Um, Federico was born June 5th, 1898, in Fuente Vaquero, Spain, which is located right here near Granada. His parents were Federico Garcia Rodriguez, who was a wealthy landowner, and he was also involved in the sugar industry. And his mother, Vicenta Lorca Romero, who is a piano teacher as well as a school teacher. They did move around a bit. In 1905, they moved to Valderrubio, and then they moved to Granada in 1909, and this is where he would attend high school. And because of the landscape that he lived in and the general area that he lived in, he felt very close to the countryside and the natural world, which would later inspire his later works. So in his early years, in 1915, he attended the University of Granada, where he studied law, literature, and composition. And this is where I believe he wanted to become a musical composer. However, he wasn't very interested in school, but he was known as an extraordinary pianist. It also took him 9 years to complete his bachelor's degree. And throughout his adolescence, this is where he would experiment more with his writing. And much of his poetry focused on adolescence, intense spiritual and sexual malaise. So, some of the early poetry and plays that he wrote when he was younger, his first book was known as Impresiones y Pasajes, which was published in 1918, and this was written in prose. And this was his sentimental response to a series of journeys through Spain as a university student. And his second book was Libro de Poemas, which is book of poems, and this was published in 1921. And it was an uneven collection of predominantly poems culled from his juvenile or his adolescence. However, both were they weren't very unsuccessful, but they just didn't get the response that he wanted. And this would fuel his resistance to publishing his later works. And he often preferred to do live reenactments of himself of his works, and this would gain many admirers. So his early plays, he would produce two very early plays. In 1920, a Spanish director premiered Lorca's first full-length play, and this would be called El Maleficio de la Mariposa, and this would be a symbolist work about a lovesick cockroach. And he would write another play in 1923. However, it wouldn't be premiered until 1927, and it'd go by the name of Mariana Penida. And the sets used in the play were used by his good friend Salvador Dali, which they were rumored to also be lovers at some point. And both plays received either very negative reviews or just mixed reviews in general. And um, one of it wasn't until this point that he started gaining national recognition, and this would primarily come from his play Romancero Gitano in 1928, and this was a lyrical evocation of the central world of the Andalusian Romani people, which were also known as the Gitanos in Spanish. However, um, Lorca would soon be very overwhelmed with the the sudden fame that he received. He would also have a bad falling out with Salvador Dali, and he would have a love affair that would soon come to a tragic end. And this would lead him to a severe depression. And then he decided, you know what, I'm just going to go up and, I'm going to travel to the United States and I'm going to go to Cuba. And this is where he would look for new inspiration for his poetry. So some of his later work um, would come from his visit to New York and Cuba, and this is where he would write Poeta in Nueva York, and this would be published in 1940, and this would be about the urban decay and the injustices he saw in New York, and this would be a series of poems, and then he would also write El Público in Cuba, and this would be a multifaceted play where he would explore the nature of homosexual passion, and he would write several other plays and poems that he was also famously known for. And during the last 2 years of his life, Lorca premiered Yerma in 1934 and completed a first draft of the House of Bernarda Alba. And unfortunately, he was tragically murdered, and this would come in the summer of 1936, and this would be the beginning of the Spanish Civil War. At this point, he was working on Aurelia and Bernarda Alba when he was arrested by right-wing nationalist forces who belonged to the Franco regime that was taking over at that point, and he was arrested August 16th for homosexuality and his political affiliation with the Socialist Party. Um, the exact date of his murder is unfortunately not known. However, he was driven to the countryside and shot on August 18th or 19th, and his remains have not been exhumed or found in Grenada. And there have been several investigations into where his body may be located or his remains, but they have not found anything. And we also have to keep in mind that he wasn't the only one. Many other people were killed in the same fashion. Um, but we should always remember Federico Garcia's Lorca as a prominent and prolific um, po- uh, playwright and poet. He achieved international recognition as an emblematic member of the generation of 1927. He introduced symbolism, futurism, and surrealism into Spanish literature. And in the short span of his um, 19 years, um, in his career as a poet and playwright, he was able to revitalize and replenish Spanish poetry and sort of the culture surrounding that. And he's just considered one of the most prominent Spanish poets and playwrights of the 20th century. And that is the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for watching.